Hello and welcome to BharatShakti.in, your one-stop portal for anything to do with defense in India and Southeast Asia. I'm Nitin Gokhale. On Tuesday, the Government of India and particularly the Ministry of Defense announced a new scheme for recruitment into the three armed forces called Agnipath, uh, through which young men to begin with will join the three services as soldiers, sailors, and air warriors at the ripe age or a very young age of 17 and a half and serve for 4 years, just 4 years, and then leave the service. Only 25% of that lot will rejoin if selected by a process of elimination back into the armed forces to serve the entire tenure of a soldier in the three forces or equivalent in the three forces. This scheme has generated a debate that has divided the military community, both serving as well as retired, and is subject of many discussions, not just in the military stations, but also in the larger national discourse. What does it entail? How is it going to pan out? And is it really a good thing? Is something that we are going to discuss today. And joining me in this discussion is one of the foremost observers of what I call military sociology and a well known face on BharatShakti.in as well as our sister concern Stat News Global, Rear Admiral Sudarshan Shrikhande, now based in Goa, but someone who has served on several ships and has since devoted time to write on strategic as well as tactical issues concerning the three armed forces and the other militaries in the world. Welcome to this program, Admiral Shrikhande.
Thank you very much, Nitin, for having me. Pleasure to be back.
No, exactly. In fact, this subject, as you are aware, this has been a topic of intense discussion and debate over the past at least a month, if not more, about the efficacy of the government's decision to now recruit soldiers, sailors, and airmen or air warriors for a period of just 4 years, akin to something like what short service commission used to be for officers earlier, and then let them go, at least 75% of them, who then will follow their pursuit of other vocations, is something that the government has now finally announced. And so, your first thoughts on this scheme to begin with, then we can discuss the other issues.
Yes, my first thoughts are that this is probably going to turn out to be a good step. Uh, in many ways, it is also it has happened in the past, even in India, even pre-independence, often happened. We've had short-term hostilities only ratings, hostilities only soldiers, both in the First World War and in the Second World War. Also, if we go into the details of regimental histories, as you know, given in say uh, uh, Kaushik Roy's book of the Indian Army and the First World War, or Stephen Wilkinson's book, or Major Donovan Jackson's 1940 book of 600 pages, where several regimental histories are encapsulated over a few pages. What one can discern is that short recruitments, color service, major changes in the organization of regiments, etc., has happened a lot. A lot of it happened during the early stages and the later stages of the East India Company time, but huge changes took place after the 1857 War of Independence, rebellion, or the mutiny, as various people called it. Thereafter, of course, a fair amount of sort of motivated steps were taken based on British political requirements of a creation of a fundamental myth, I think, of martial classes or martial races, which was not entirely based on fact, but on the convenience of the colonial rulers, and that continued for quite some time. But even within that, There were lots of changes in the years of the First World War, then the demobilization, the shrinking of the Indian army, and again the ramping up in during the Second World War. So we have been through these phases earlier also. In the Navy itself, we've had different types of cadre reviews of sailors, new types of entries that were tried. Some of them were great successes, like the Naval Entry Artificer Scheme, which I believe is likely to continue. So co- change has always been difficult because armed forces traditionally are conservative, and yet uh, we have in the past shown a lot of flexibility. So I think we should welcome this step. Uh, it is a lot like what other armed forces are doing, but here I'd like to sort of make a larger point, is that the type of entry, the duration of service, and eventual combat performance under different conditions are not givens, and they are not linked to cause and effect, as some of the comments seem to suggest. Regular armies, all volunteer forces, have suffered defeats in various countries. In India too, 1962, we had a long service army where we did not do well at the strategic operational and in some cases at the tactical levels also. Likewise, there are lessons from the IPKF. So on the other hand, short-term armies, drafted armies, or conscript militaries have also done well in many cases and done badly in other cases. So it's a very complex relationship, and I don't think we should oversimplify inferences that have been made in the past few weeks, as you said.
So, indeed, it's a mixed bag, as you said, by giving these excellent examples. One other example that comes readily to mind is the post 1962 rapid expansion of the Indian Army, where short service and emergency commission officers were taken into the army, who served for 5 years and then later went on to join other services like the Indian Foreign Service, the Indian Administrative Service, the Indian Frontier Administration Service, and where they got preferences or advantage over the other compatriots who were joining these services. So India has been through these examples. People tend to forget even recent history. But be that as it may, one of the apprehensions has been that the duration of this, what used to be called initially tour of duty, now called Agnipath, and the people who are joining are being called Agniveers, is too short at 4 years. Is that something that would concern you if you were a leader, a military leader serving currently? Sudarshan?
Yes, uh, I'm not too sure whether everything is still very clear, because this is now, I think the armed forces are running an experiment, in the sense that while decisions have been taken, the outcomes, are still fluid because they are yet to happen. So we will know in a few years how sociologically this proposal is taken by those who serve for 4 years, and say three-quarters of them will go out at the end of that period. But as you yourself said, uh, we will still have, I mean, one of the things we need to understand, that this is not conscription. So even the tour of duty is an all volunteer activity, and we will still be all volunteer forces. It is just that 100% of the recruits may not be full time uh, uh, servers as we used to be and are currently there. But even within that, as you mentioned, emergency commission officers, short service commission officers have acquitted themselves well, and they continue to do that even today. There are some prejudices about this, but I think we need to really look at it very dispassionately and not emotionally or with biases. So 4 years might seem a short time, but it is still longer than the 2 years and 3 years conscript armed forces in several countries, or indeed what the draft used to be in some countries for hostilities only. So 4 years is not a short time, where I think we need to think about and do more perhaps, and I'm sure the serving community, the current leadership, are figuring things out, and many of the things must have been figured out. It's just that we as veterans may not know and need not know the details. But I would say that uh, a great amount of thought must have gone into devising the initial training duration, then the additional training that is required, the familiarization periods in between, and thereafter any small refreshers that might be required even in the 4 year period. So, as you said, uh, it may seem a short tenure because we are now moving from, say, 15 years pensionable service to 4 years and then 25% serving their full terms, as indeed has happened in so many armed forces which have short term initial entries. So it is not a radical move. This has been the model in lots of places, and I would again like to emphasize that we have to distinguish between cause and effect. That means there is no evidence historically that one model works better than the other over a long period of time. The Americans, after 1975 Vietnam debacle, uh, uh, thought that once they go to an all volunteer force, victory will be theirs. And indeed, in some of the smaller wars, they did well. At the tactical level, they've done well. But ultimately, even at the strategic level, they've not done well. On the other hand, we see shorter duration, almost conscript forces in Ukraine and in Russia currently engaged in a conflict where the outcomes are still quite iffy. If one looks at it dispassionately, and the Russians don't seem to be doing very well. So there are no clear models of what works better than the other, and therefore this 4 year service is something that we'll have to watch, we'll have to leverage, and the people who are leaving at the age of 22 would probably be very confident youngsters who unlike the larger numbers that leave at between the ages of say 35 or so, uh, or 32 to 37, something like that, uh, would probably be be less adventurous in what they do. And you're right about second careers and other re-employment opportunities, etc. And I do hope, as we heard in the press conference today, that state governments, private companies, etc., will also step up and value these ex-servicemen and women, and leverage what they've learned in terms of technical competence, in terms of discipline, in terms of imbibing ethos. One sort of contradiction that I find quite interesting, in the social media, is on the one hand we've been asking for larger scale, compulsory military exposure and training for a lot of people, and now that the fact that this system is likely to give it, we are expressing apprehensions about what might happen when so many people who are trained in the use of firearms, etc., go into the open society. I think these are overblown fears, and I think we should be careful about exaggerations or emotional responses.
So indeed, Sudarshan, as you say, that these contradictions are actually, or the contradictory thoughts are born out of the refusal of some people to come out of their old mindsets, and therefore feeling apprehensive about the future. But just to say that, like some people have mentioned that once a soldier, always a soldier. And these emergency commission officers or even short service commission officers, even today, after having served only for 5 years, continue to take pride and continue to imbibe the ethos of the armed forces. Just to take an example, Captain C.R. Gopinath, who made a great success of the Deccan Air that time in the 2000s, or DLF's KP Singh, or Captain Amrinder Singh, who served only for maybe 7, 8 years and sort of volunteered to go out as captain in the army, have done excellently well in their chosen professions. So I think this apprehension about all those who are going to go out, the three-fourths of the Agniveers, will become a danger to the society, militarization of the society in the current context are, I think, overblown and exaggerated. I think we should just ignore them. But there are a couple of other issues, functional issues, which I want to pick your mind on. Is on a ship, for instance, when these people come, when the newcomers come, how would they integrate with the ship's company? Because others would have trained a little longer, those who are there, and the seniors would have had longer tenures. So in this limited time, would the people who come on board the ship be able to adjust, and will the other people, members of the ship's company, be able to accept some of these newcomers in the form of Agniveers? Would you think there would be some adjustment problems, or it's not such a challenge?
I mean, that's a very interesting thought. Uh, uh, let me say that we've been through such issues earlier also, and not only our Navy. Uh, there's there's a famous analysis of what happened in the Royal Navy, where as the artificer entry, was created and increased, who were highly technically competent, um, there was a feeling between them and other sailors that it was their seniors actually who seemed to be relatively incompetent and unprofessional. Both sides were wrong, I think, in being in over interpreting their apprehensions of the newcomers coming in. But this is something that keeps happening, where older generations like to think of themselves as the best ones, and everybody who comes after them, somehow less competent. Well, in the Navy itself, we've had when we went to, most sailors coming in at +2 science background was a significant upgrade, and there was some apprehension that younger sailors felt that many of the seniors were less technically competent in a couple of years of their own experience than they would have expected. So these things have happened in the past. They might continue to happen. But I suppose, we always find a way of working together. I mean, a ship's company is of one company, as we say. So this amalgamation happens. We went into what we call, higher secondary entry recruits that came in. Before that, we had the matriculate entry recruits. As the Navy upgraded the minimum educational requirements of sailors over the generations, some of these apprehensions were felt at that time. But after a few years, it was realized that the apprehensions were in the mind, thankfully, and not at the deck level. So things work out. Even here, I feel that as the Agniveers start coming into ships and serving, they will be accepted as the new reality. They will be assimilated. They will be trained by the other seniors who will continue to serve for a longer time. And 25% of these will be very much part of 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 that Navy as time goes on, and so would the 75%, as you say, leave the Navy and yet retain a great amount of affection for the Navy. There might be some who might be disaffected, but then, no matter what the system, there will always be a very small percentage of disaffected people in any organization, in any armed forces of any country. So I
Oh,
don't think there
indeed.
is any reason to be alarmed about this. It will work out, and I'm sure it will work out because it has worked out quite well in the past. That's my experience of
Oh,
the Navy.
that's true. I think, and you had a long experience. I must also say this here, and I must clarify to many of our listeners that the armed forces leadership has been deliberating on this aspect, or this new scheme or new plan of recruitment for over 2 years, from whatever little personal knowledge I have of interacting at the highest level. So it's not as if it has happened overnight. It has not happened as a knee-jerk reaction, and definitely not as something that has been imposed on the armed forces, because the armed forces have deliberated upon it, discussed, looked at the pros and the cons, and on balance, they realize that this should be at least started off, and then go along, as they go along, tweak it if necessary, which I'm sure the government will go along if required after, say, 4 years, or the first batch ends its tenure. But coming to the army specifically here, one of the big apprehensions, big fear that is being expressed by old timers, veterans, is that the army fights, or the army regiments and battalions fight on something called Naam Namak Nishan, and which is like the Paltan's Izzat, or regiment's Izzat or prestige. Then comes the nation. That. And if people come for a short duration, they come only in dribs and drabs in this unit, and they come from all India, all caste or all caste background, then they may not have the same cohesion, is what is being expressed by many of the army veterans to begin with. What is your stand, or what is your take on this? Is this something that one should worry about, given the way the Indian Army functions? Since you also seen Indian Army also quite closely, or at least heard from your own colleagues about the way it functions. What is your take on this?
Uh, that's also an important point you bring up, Naam, Namak, Nishan. But each service works on the ethos of Naam, Namak, and Nishan. And Nishan or Namak as loyalty is it would be perhaps incorrect to think, to reduce all of this to the regimental system, because the Indian Navy and the Indian Air Force, as indeed I think the Army Chief said, 75% of the Indian Army for decades has transited towards all India, all class compositions. So this is also the regimental system itself has changed a lot in the Indian Army, especially in the last 3 or 4 decades. As you know, Stephen Wilkinson's book, Kaushik Roy's articles and books talk about, or something that I think in the introduction of Stephen Wilkinson's book, somebody called Kalikar has said, if I remember right, he said that you can't have a national army unless its doors are thrown open to all areas, and I think all classes is what he said at that time. This is, I think, in the early chapters or perhaps in the introduction of Stephen Wilkinson's, fairly recent book on the Indian Army. Uh, that said, the regimental system has its strengths, but I would say that again, it is not perhaps correct to exaggerate that soldiers really fight only for the regiment or primarily for the regiment, because the record there, if looked at dispassionately, could also be a mixed one, where one particular battalion of a particular regiment may not have acquitted itself quite well in particular operations, and another battalion did quite well. Maybe the contexts were very different, but that brings me to a larger point, that warfare is a mix of a lot of things. It's about leadership, it's about training, it's about motivation, it's about morale, it's about logistics. A whole lot of things come together in calculating fighting efficiency. And in that, I think to imagine that an all India, all class system, which already exists, as I said, or some changes that might be made in terms of the minimum or the maximum service that most people will do as a death knell to the old ways, is perhaps a very conservative, conformist way of looking at it, whereas attitudinally we need to be a lot more different. And here is where I think John Boyd's uh, uh, term about people, ideas, and hardware, I would like to put it people, ideas, and things, because it's sort of is easier to understand that way, are what are
Things, yes.
important. So I think the Agniveer scheme is probably a very good idea that needs to be now executed, because I think, as you mentioned, it has been conceptualized, and it is probably not right for us as veterans to imagine that very little thinking has gone into it. Uh, there have been some issues which were clarified today about uh, a more technical entry which I mentioned some time back of naval artificers. Now they are going to come under some different sort of nomenclature perhaps, or the naval entry artificer scheme will come in. So I suppose each service has been given some flexibility, by the DMA in figuring out the details, and I'm sure that will happen as time goes on. So the artificer entries will also come in. They might do 2 years or 3 years or 4 years as Agniveers, and thereafter be trained and educated for the artificer pipeline. I don't think the Navy is taking steps to becoming less technically competent. I think this part, as CNS was mentioning today, if I heard that right, we are they are valuing technical competence, and technical competence I think has to be valued by all the three services, and I think they are doing that. So this will build up slowly. Nothing needs to be etched in stone. No policy is permanent. Uh, there will have to be, feedback systems. There will have to be very dispassionate, evaluations of how things are going. But some of the comparisons that have been made in the social media, for instance, a very catchy line, at one level of somebody saying that, if you thought pensions were expensive, try defeat. I think is an overtly emotional and statistically inconsistent, way of putting that out, because as I mentioned, there is no direct cause and effect linkage between years of service that a soldier or a sailor puts in and the combat effectiveness of that service, that ship, or that battalion, or that corps, or that division. There are just too many variables for us to make simplistic and hasty inferences of historical examples.
I'm glad you said that because there was another line by one of my good friends and a very prolific writer who said this is going to be a kindergarten army. Now, that is the other issue that I have is that people are making judgments based on maybe half known facts or not fully known facts. Because I was asking people who are conceptualized this scheme, and they were saying that it is not going to be until 2037, 15 years from now, that the ratio between the Agniveers and the regular or the longer duration serving soldiers would come to 50-50 as a proportion of the number of soldiers in the three services, soldiers or airmen or sailors. So it's a long duration experiment, and which will have its pluses and minuses as we go along. But as you've given such great examples of the past, which there are lessons to be taken from there, and I'm sure matters have been studied, and I think we should give it a chance, is what I would think of this Agnipath scheme. It's no longer called Tour of Duty anymore. It's called Agnipath and Agniveers, the people who come in there. So I think on that note, I must say that both of us would at least agree that this is an experiment worth trying out, and give it time to either succeed or to be less successful before it is tweaked as the years go by. Is that, I mean, this is what my thought is, but if any final thoughts you have, I would welcome them and then close the program.
Uh, I agree with you that not only should we expect it to work, I'm sure the leadership will make it work. I mean, that's like past leaderships have made earlier adjustments, earlier changes work. So change is itself, to use that cliche, a constant. Um, and yet there are some consistent principles of cohesion, cooperation, competence, and warrior ethos, which will further, it could even turn out to be better than other models. We'll have to see that. We'll have to evaluate, and I agree with you, nothing should be etched in stone. And I don't think the intention is of anybody that this is now going to be the permanent system. We'll have to evaluate, keep an open mind on it, and train hard to fight hard.
Indeed. So, on that note, thanks for your time and your thoughts. As always, delightful and insightful. So, look forward to another occasion to discuss many more such interesting topics concerning the military, especially the Indian military in the current context. Thank you very much for your time, Admiral Sudarshan Shrikhande.
Thank you very much, Nitin.
So, viewers, you might wonder why we are only on audio. It's mainly because of my own sort of illness. I've got a lower back pain problem, which prevents me from sitting up for too long, not definitely for half an hour, like we have discussed now. So, therefore, we thought it's the right time to at least discuss it in the audio form. But I hope to get better as soon as possible and continue with such programs in the future on bharatshakti.in. For the time being, it's goodbye, but do keep sending comments, feedback, and of course, you know where to reach us, where to subscribe to our social media channels, and also keep watching our YouTube channel as well as reading various opinions and analysis on bharatshakti.in, the website. For the time being, it's goodbye.